South of the Border, West of the Sea by Haruki Murakami. Chapter 7. I got married when I was 30. I met my wife one summer holiday while I was traveling alone. She was 5 years younger than me. I was walking along a road in the country when it suddenly started raining. I ducked into the nearest place I could find to get out of the storm, and she and a girlfriend were already there. All three of us were soaked to the skin, and we started talking while we waited for the rain to stop. If it hadn't rained then, if I had taken an umbrella, which was entirely possible, since I had seriously debated doing so before I left the hotel, I would never have met her. And if I hadn't met her, I'd still be slaving away at the educational publishers, still leaning against the wall in my flat at night, alone, drinking and babbling to myself. It makes me realize how limited our possibilities ever are. Yukiko and I were attracted to each other from the beginning. Her friend was much prettier, but I only had eyes for Yukiko. An irrationally strong attraction pulled us together. I'd nearly forgotten what that kind of magnetism felt like. She lived in Tokyo too, so after our return, we went out together. The more I saw of her, the more I liked her. She was, if anything, on the plain side, at least not the type to attract men wherever she went. But there was something in her face that was meant for me alone. Every time we met, I took a good, long look at her, and I loved what I saw. "Why are you staring at me?" she'd ask. "Because you're pretty," I'd reply. "You're the first one who's ever said that." "I'm the only one who knows," I'd tell her. And believe me, I know. At first, she didn't believe me, but soon she did. We'd go to some quiet place to talk. I could tell her anything, up front, no holds barred. I could feel the weight of all that I had lost in those past 10 years, all those years down the drain, bearing down on me. Before it was too late, I had to get some of it back. Holding Yukiko, I felt a nostalgic, long-gone thrill race through me. When we said goodbye, I was lost once again. Loneliness pained me, silence had me exasperated. A week before my 30th birthday, after we'd been going out for 3 months, I proposed to her. Her father was the president of a medium-sized construction company and a real character. He'd hardly been to school, yet he was an achiever. A bit too aggressive for my taste. Still, I was impressed by his unique outlook on life. I'd never met anybody like him. He drove around Tokyo in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes, but he was never snobbish. When I went to see him to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage, he just said, "You're not children anymore, so if you like each other, it's up to you." I wasn't much of a catch, a nothing employee of a nothing company, but that didn't faze him. Yukiko had an older brother and a younger sister. Her brother was vice president of the construction firm and was going to take over. He wasn't a bad sort, but he was overshadowed by his father. Of the 3 children, the younger sister, who was at college, was the most outgoing. She was used to getting her way. Come to think of it, she might have made a better president than her brother. About 6 months after we were married, Yukiko's father asked me to come and see him. He'd heard from my wife that I wasn't too happy working for a publishing company, and he wanted to know if I was planning to leave my job. "I have no problem with resigning," I said. "The problem is, what do I do after that?" "How about coming to work for me?" he asked. I'll work you to the ground, but you won't beat the pay. Well, I'm not cut out for editing textbooks, but I don't think working in a construction firm's my thing either, I said truthfully. I appreciate the offer, but if I'm not interested in the work, the whole thing will end up being more bother than it's worth. You're probably right. Shouldn't force people to do what they don't want to do, he replied. It sounded as if he'd anticipated the answer. We were having a few drinks. His son hardly touched alcohol, so sometimes the two of us would drink together. By the way, my company has a building in Aoyama. It's under construction, should be finished next month. The location's good, and it'll be quite a place. It's a little off the beaten track now, but the area's going to grow. I was thinking maybe you could open some kind of shop there. It's company property, so I'll have to take the going rate for the down payment and rent. But if you'd like to have a go at it, I can lend you as much as you want. I thought about it for a while. The possibilities were intriguing. That's how I came to open an upmarket jazz bar in the basement of a brand new building in Aoyama. I had worked in a bar at college, so I was familiar with the ins and outs of running a drinking establishment, the kind of drinks and food you should serve, the music and atmosphere, the sort of clientele to aim for, and so on. My father-in-law's company handled the interior decorating. He brought in a first-rate interior design firm and set them onto it. Their price was surprisingly reasonable, and when the bar was finished, it was a sight to behold. The bar was more successful than my wildest dreams, and 2 years later I opened a second one, also in Aoyama. This was a bigger place, featuring a live jazz trio. It took a lot of time and effort, not to mention a great deal of money, but I ended up with a popular and unique club. I'd done a reasonable job with the opportunity presented to me, and I finally felt able to relax for a moment. Not coincidentally, this was when our first child, a girl, was born. At first, I used to help out behind the counter, mixing cocktails, but after the opening of the second place, I was too busy with the business side. I had to make sure everything went smoothly, negotiating prices, hiring, keeping accounts. I even threw in my tuppence worth regarding the menu. Surprisingly, I wasn't at all bad at this kind of work. I loved the process of starting from scratch, creating something, seeing it through till it was absolutely perfect. It was my bar, my own little world. Could you find this kind of happiness proofreading school textbooks? No way. During the day, I'd take care of all sorts of chores. Then, at night, I'd make the rounds of my 2 bars, checking out the cocktails to see they tasted right, watching the customers' reactions, making sure my employees were up to scratch. And I listened to music. Each month, I paid back some of what I owed to my father-in-law. Still, I was making a pretty good profit. Yukiko and I bought a 4-bedroom apartment in Aoyama and a BMW 320. And had a second child, another girl. Before I knew what had hit me, I was the father of 2 little girls. When I turned 36, I bought a small cottage in Hakone and a red Jeep Cherokee for Yukiko to shop and ferry the children around in. With the profit from my bars, I could have opened up a 3rd place, but I didn't plan to expand. Keeping track of all the details for 2 bars was enough. Watching over any more would have left me exhausted. I was sacrificing enough time to work as it was. I discussed this with my wife's father, and he suggested I put extra money into stocks and property. It takes hardly any time or effort, he told me, but I knew absolutely nothing about the stock market or land. So he said, "Leave the details to me. If you do as I say, you'll do all right. There's a knack to these things." So I invested as he told me. And sure enough, in short time, I'd made a healthy profit. "Now you get it, right?" he asked me. "There's a special knack to investing. You could work for 100 years in a company and never end up doing this well. In order to succeed, you need luck and brains. Those are the basics, but they're not enough. You need capital. Not enough capital, and your hands are tied. And above all, you need the knack. Without it, all other things will get you nowhere." "I suppose you're right," I said. I knew what he was getting at. The knack he talked about was a system he'd created, a tenacious, complex system for generating vast sums of money by building up an immense network of contacts, gathering vital information, and investing accordingly. Slipping through the net of laws and taxes, transfiguring itself in the process, the profit thus generated swelled almost beyond measure. If I hadn't met my father-in-law, I'd still be editing textbooks, still living in a lousy little flat in Nishiogi-Kubo, still driving a used Toyota Corona with an air conditioner on the blink. Now, though, in a short space of time I found myself the owner of 2 bars in one of the smartest parts of town, employing more than 30 people and making more money than I'd ever made in my life, or ever dreamed of making. The business was running so well that even my accountant was impressed, and the bars had a good reputation. I'm not saying I'm the only one who could have done it. Take away my father-in-law's capital and his knack, and I'd never have got off the ground. But I wasn't entirely comfortable with this arrangement. I felt I was taking a dishonest shortcut, using unfair means to get to where I was. After all, I was a part of the late 60s, early 70s generation that spawned the radical student movement. We were the first to yell a resounding no at the logic of late capitalism, which had devoured any remaining post-war ideals. It was like the outbreak of a fever just as the country stood at a crucial turning point. And here I was myself, swallowed up by the very same capitalist logic, savouring Schubert's Winterreise as I lounged in my BMW, waiting for the lights to change at a crossroads in Ritzy, Aoyama. I was living someone else's life, not my own. How much of this person I called myself was actually me, and how much was not? These hands clutching the steering wheel, what percentage of them could I call my own? The scenery outside, how much of it was real? The more I thought about it, the less I seemed to understand. Not that I was unhappy. I had no complaints. Yukiko was a gentle, considerate woman, and I loved her. When she gained a bit of weight after giving birth, she started dieting and exercising seriously. A little weight didn't bother me, though. I still thought she was beautiful. I loved to be with her, and I loved sleeping with her. Something about her soothed me. No matter what, I'd be damned if I'd returned to the kind of life I had in my 20s, days of loneliness and isolation. This was where I belonged. Here was where I was loved and protected, and where I could love and protect others, my wife, my children, back. Being in this position was an unexpected discovery, a total new experience. Every morning I drove my older daughter to a private nursery school, the two of us singing along to a tape of children's songs on the car stereo. Then, before heading out to the small office I rented nearby, I'd play for a while with my younger daughter. In the summer, we'd spend weekends at her cottage in Hakone, watching the fireworks, boating around the lake and strolling in the hills. When my wife was pregnant, I'd had a few flings, but nothing serious. I never slept with any one woman more than once or twice. Okay, 3 times at most. I never felt I was having an affair with a capital A. I just wanted to have someone to sleep with, the same as my partners. Avoiding entanglements, I chose my bedfellows with care. Maybe I was testing something by sleeping with them, trying to see what I could find in them and what they could find in me. Shortly after my first child was born, a postcard was forwarded to me from my parents' home. It was a card for a funeral with a woman's name on it. She died when I was 36, but I couldn't place the name. The card was postmarked Nagoya. I didn't know a soul there. After a while, though, I realized who the woman was. Izumi's cousin, who used to live in Kyoto. I'd completely forgotten her name. Her parents' home, it turned out, was in Nagoya. It didn't take much work to work out that Izumi herself had sent the card to me. No one else would have. At first, though, the reason why was a mystery. But after reading it several times, I could sense the unforgiving coldness that had gone into it. Izumi had never forgotten what I had done, and had never forgiven me. She must have been living a miserable life. A contented woman would never have sent that card, or if she had, she would have written a word or two of explanation. The cousin and everything about her came rushing back to me. Her room, her body, the passionate sex we had shared. But the total clarity these memories once had for me was gone, like smoke blown away in the wind. I couldn't imagine why she had died. 36 was such an unnatural age. Her last name was the same as before, which meant she had never married, or had, and was divorced. I found out more about Izumi and her whereabouts from an old high school friend. He'd read a Tokyo bar guide feature in the magazine Brutus, seen my photo, and learned that I was running the 2 bars in Aoyama. One evening, he came over to where I was sitting at the counter and said, "Hi, how's it going?" No implication that he'd gone out of his way to see me. He just happened to be drinking with some of his buddies and came over to say hi. "I've been to this bar many times," he said. "It's near my office, but I had no idea you were the owner. What a small world." In high school, I was the outsider, but he'd had good marks, played sports, and was the type you'd find on the student council. He was a pleasant sort, never pushy, an altogether nice guy. He was in the football team and had been big to begin with, but now he'd put on weight, a double chin, his 3-piece suit straining at the seams. Due to the entertaining clients all the time, he explained. Big companies are hell on wheels, he'd said. You've got overtime, entertaining clients, job transfers, do a bad job and they kick your butt. Meet your quota and they'll raise it. Not the kind of thing decent people should be into. His office, it turned out, was in Aoyama 1 Combe, just down the street. We talked about the things you'd expect school friends to talk about when they hadn't seen each other for 18 years. Our jobs, marriage, how many children we had, mutual acquaintances we'd run into. That's when he mentioned Izumi. "There was a girl you were going out with then. You were always together, something or other, Ohara." "Izumi Ohara," I said. Right, he said. "Izumi Ohara. I know, I ran into her not long ago." "In Tokyo?" I asked, startled. "No, not in Tokyo. In Toyohashi." "Toyohashi?" I said, even more surprised. "You mean Toyohashi in Aichi Prefecture?" "That's right." "I don't understand it. Why did you meet Izumi in Toyohashi? What in the world would she be doing there?" It seemed he caught something hard and unyielding in my voice. I don't know why, he ventured. I just saw her there. But there's not much to tell. I'm not even completely sure if it was her. He ordered another wild turkey on the rocks. I was drinking a vodka gimlet. I don't care if there's not much to tell. I want to know. Well, he hesitated. What I mean is, sometimes I feel like it didn't actually take place. It's a weird feeling, as if I was dreaming, but it was real, you know? It's hard to explain. But it really did happen, right? I asked. Yes, he said. Then tell me. He gave a nod of resignation and took a sip of his wild turkey. I went to Toyohashi because my younger sister lives there. I was on a business trip to Nagoya and it was Friday, so I decided to go spend the night at her flat. And that's where I met Izumi. She was in the lift in my sister's block of flats. I was thinking, wow, this woman's the spitting image of that Ohara girl. But then I thought, no way, it can't be. There's no way I'd meet her in the lift at my sister's in Toyohashi of all places. Her face looked different from before. I don't understand myself why I soon realized it was her. Instinct, I guess. But it was Izumi, right? He nodded. She happened to live in the same floor as my sister. We got off together and walked down the corridor in the same direction. She went into the flat 2 doors before my sister's. I was curious and checked out the nameplate on her door. Ohara, it said. Did she notice you? He shook his head. We were in the same class, but we never really talked to each other. And besides, I've put on 40 pounds since then. She'd never recognize me. But was it really Izumi, I wonder? Ohara's a pretty common name, and there must be other people who look like her. I was wondering the same thing, so I asked my sister about what kind of person this Ohara was. My sister showed me the list of tenants' names. You know, those lists they make up when they've got to divide the cost of repainting or something. All the tenants' names were on it. And there it was, Izumi Ohara, with Izumi in katakana, not Chinese characters. There can't be that many with the same combination, surely. Which means she's single. My sister didn't know anything about that, he said. Izumi Ohara is the block's mystery woman, I found out. No one has ever spoken to her. If you say hello to her as you pass in the corridor, she ignores you. She doesn't answer the bell when you ring, not exactly about to be voted most popular in the building. That can't be her, I laughed and shook my head. Izumi isn't that kind of person. She was always outgoing, always smiling. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe it was someone else, he said. Someone with exactly the same name. Let's change the subject. But the Izumi Ohara there was living alone? I think so. Nobody ever seen any men go into her place. Nobody has a clue what she does for a living. It's a complete mystery. Well, what do you think? About what? About her? About this Izumi Ohara, who may or may not be someone with the same name. You saw her face in the lift. What do you think? Did she look all right? He thought about it. All right, I suppose, he answered. How do you mean, all right? He shook his whiskey glass. It made a clinking sound. Naturally, she's aged a bit. She's 36, after all. You and me, too. Your metabolism slows down. You put on a few pounds. Can't be a high school student forever. Agreed, I said. Why don't we change the subject? It must have been somebody else. I sighed, resting both arms on the counter. I looked him straight in the face. Look, I want to know. I have to know. Just before we left school, Izumi and I broke up. It was ugly. I screwed up and hurt her a lot. Since then, I've never had a way of finding out how she is. I had no idea where she was and what she was doing. So just tell me the unvarnished truth. It was Izumi, wasn't it? He nodded. If you put it that way, yes, it was definitely her. I'm sorry I have to tell you, though. So honestly, how was she? He was silent for a while. First of all, I want you to realize something, okay? I was in the first class as her, and thought she was pretty attractive. She was a nice girl. Nice personality. Sweet. Not a raving beauty, but, appealing. Am I right? I nodded. You really want me to tell the truth? Go ahead, I said. You're not going to like this. I don't care, just tell me the truth. He took another mouthful of whiskey. I was jealous of you, always together with her. I wanted a girlfriend like that too. Now I can let it all out, I suppose. I never forgot her. Her face was engraved in my memory. That's why, running into her, out of the blue in a lift, even 18 years later, I knew right away. What I'm getting at is this. I have no reason to want to say anything bad about her. It was a you for me too, I didn't want to admit it was true. Let me put it this way. She's no longer attractive. I bit my lip. What do you mean? Most of the children who lived in that block of flats are afraid of her. Afraid? I repeated. I looked at him, uncomprehending. He must have chosen the wrong words. What do you mean, afraid of her? Hey, why don't we stop now? I didn't really want to get into this anyway. Wait a second. What does she do? Does she say things to the kids? She doesn't say anything to anybody, as I said before. So they are afraid of her face. That's right, he said. Does she have a scar or something? No scars. Well then, what are they afraid of? He finished his whiskey and placed the glass on the counter, and looked at me for a good long time. He appeared flustered and more than a little confused. But something else was in his expression. I could catch a trace of his face as it was back at school. He looked up for a while, staring off into the distance as if watching a stream flowing off and away. Finally he spoke. I can't explain it well. Besides, I don't want to. So don't ask me anymore, okay? You'd have to see it with your own eyes to understand. Someone who hasn't actually seen it won't understand anyway. I nodded, saying nothing more, just sipping at my vodka gimlet. His tone was calm, but any further inquiries I knew he'd turn down point blank. He started to talk about the 2 years he had worked in Brazil. You won't believe it, he said, but I ran across someone from my junior high in São Paulo, of all places, working at Toyota as an engineer. His words blew right by me. When he left, he clapped me on the shoulder. Well, the years change people in many ways, right? I have no idea what went on between you and her before, but whatever it wasn't your fault. To some degree or other, everyone has that kind of experience. Even me. No kidding. I went through the same thing. But there's nothing you can do about it. Another person's life is that person's life. You can't take responsibility. It's as if we were living in a desert. You just have to get used to it. Do you see that Disney film in elementary school, The Living Desert? Yes, I answered. Our world's exactly the same. Rain falls and the flowers bloom. No rain, they wither up. Bugs are eaten by lizards, lizards are eaten by birds. But in the end, every one of them dies. They die and dry up. One generation dies and the next one takes over. That's how it goes. Lots of different ways to live and lots of different ways to die. But in the end, that doesn't make a bit of difference. All that remains is a desert. He went home, and I sat alone at the bar, drinking. After the bar was closed for the night, after all the customers had gone, even after the staff had straightened up the place and gone home themselves, I sat there alone. I didn't want to go home right away. I phoned my wife and told her I had something to take care of at work and would be late. I turned out the lights and sat in the dark, drinking whiskey. Too much trouble to get ice out. I drank it straight. Everyone just keeps on disappearing. Some things just vanish, as if they were cut away. Others fade slowly into the mist, and all that remains is a desert. When I left the bar just before dawn, a light rain was falling on the main street of Aoyama. I was exhausted. Soundlessly, the rain soaked the rows of tall buildings standing there like so many gravestones. I left my car in the bar's parking lot and walked home. On the way, I sat down on a handrail and watched a large crow that was cawing from the top of some traffic lights. The 4 a.m. streets looked shabby and filthy. The shadow of decay and disintegration lurked everywhere, and I was a part of it, like a shadow burned into a wall. End of chapter 7.